Hello, this is the week 3 video for business and professional communication. We are doing a great job, by the way, getting through the class this summer. This is over halfway. We're over halfway done. We can see the light. There's still some assignments we're going to get through here towards the end, but it's the same rhythm, just so you know, like the assignments every week, or we're in this rhythm. So just keep following that and whew, boom, we'll be done. So thank you, everybody. This week is kind of has a few different things, but our concern is really how are we communicating ethically? That especially in the field of business where there's a lot of rhetoric and persuasion because of sales and there's a lot of money involved and things like that, that we need to think about how we are communicating in an ethical way. So I put up the official National Communication Association's credo for ethical communication. And this is supposed to be a series of statements that really encompass communication, and then we can apply it to the world of business. So make sure you go into the vocabulary page for week 3 and take a look at those and see if any of them really resonate with you. It'd be interesting for you to bring those out in your key takeaways or team meetings. After that, in the vocabulary section, we also have this idea of how we are conducting ourselves in conversations. So if we're ethical communication is our verbal and nonverbal behavior, and it's about how are we self-monitoring ourselves so we can be appropriate and effective. But it's also that idea of being other-centered or audience-centered. And we'll get into Aristotle's artistic proofs, which is really formed through how how we observe the situation and craft our message to be appropriate and effective to that situation. That means you need to be a self-monitor. That means that you need to engage in a curious way with feedback. And this is feedback that we can be solicited from others that we feel that will be open with us and know us so that the feedback can be appropriate. And it's a little bit different. Sometimes we're bombarded with feedback that's not solicited, and it can be abrupt. And we do want to think about, even when we are asking for feedback on a situation, that we take care of ourselves and say, hey, I'd like to make an appointment for feedback, or we just came out of this meeting. If you have a minute, can you let me know how that went? I mean, it's good to have a curious openness and find those people that you can have that transaction with. Other things that are listed here about being a self-monitor is this idea of ethnocentrism. So last week, we already covered some ideas of intercultural communication. And you should always be a student of different culture communication styles. There's quite a few of them. And there's a lot of depth and knowledge that we have about them that can really impact your ability to succeed and adapt and be appropriate. I hope you're seeing a theme. When we talk about ethnocentrism, this is a term that we want to become aware of our biases and our filters and how we show up, that we can impose an expectation on a communication event or on a person that becomes fixed. Like, you can come into a dialogue so fixed about what you expect that you can drive the outcome of it. Or if you're so fixed in it, you will only select the things that are happening that confirm your expectation. That's called confirmation bias. Ethnocentrism is when we are creating, when we have a filter about cultures specifically. Ethno is the word for culture, and centrism, kind of like egocentrism, someone who's egocentric, is fixed in their point of view and their mindset and their facts, and there's no room for anything else except the way they see it, and they are dismissive, and they're either dismissive, they ignore, or they attack anything that is not from their point of view. Ethnocentric is doing the same thing, but with cultures, like, oh, that's a different culture. And then we're going to kind of put it down into this hierarchy where we're going to dismiss it. We're going to not think it's as high quality, or we'll use embedded language like little micro expressions in order to create a hierarchy where we are amplifying our culture as the superior culture to someone else. So that's what ethnocentrism is. Now, one thing with this is it doesn't mean that you have to have a preference for another culture over your own. You could still have a preference for your culture, but it's not at the cost of the other culture group, where I need to prove my preference for my culture is correct by putting down yours, right? So we have to be careful of how we do that. And again, we want to think about that kind of click whirl effect. What's another way to think about it? That there's this tendency that we have to move straight into comparison and competitiveness. And as soon as we move into comparison and competitiveness, we have a tendency to move out of ethical communication into these egocentric, ethnocentric, confirmation bias, and all the other perception biases. The other one that I highlight on your vocabulary sheet for this week is stereotyping. And stereotyping is, let's just break down what it is and define it, where it's a generalization about a group of people. So I'm having an interaction with one person, and I identify that that person belongs in this group. I say, oh, this person, I recognize this person, they belong in this group. And then whatever ideas I have about this group, whatever patterns or labels or expectations or biases that I have about this group, I impose onto the individual. And then my interaction is driven by my stereotype of the group that I've decided they belong to. Now, I very purposefully I'm trying to break this down in a way that you can understand that when when stereotypes are created, they are usually created by the out group, not by the in group. And they are often, the generalization is like a shortcut way to compartmentalize and label that group. And it's that shortcut is like these kind of coded language we do to create identities of we, them, or us. There's us, and then there's them, and then there's we, and then there's those other people that are in that group. And so those kind of that stereotypical language, and the inaccuracies of them, and how they can be used as weapons, is really diminishing the humanity of the individual. And it's not really taking that person for who they are, separate from labels that have been created by groups of people that aren't usually even have that same identity. Sometimes just to think about, sometimes comedians will use stereotypes and things like that to amplify. And again, in the entertainment industry with storytelling and comedians, they're using those stereotypes and generalizations as shortcuts to make a joke. And even if that person is a part of the group, let's say there's someone who has the identity of the group, and they're using the stereotype of the out group, that is usually done as a power move, that you've decided this is who I am, and I'm going to now own my identity and be proud of it, and I'm going to take power over that language. And so that's often the way that we see that being used. I just making a note about that because that does happen. I could talk a lot more about it. Maybe someone will have a question about it and I can add even more in. So on my page, I put things to think about when communicating in order to move yourself out of stereotyped shortcuts in our communication behaviors. It's really good to think about when you're in an interpersonal interaction with one other person, to recognize if you have that click whirl response to want to categorize them, and then set it aside, right? If you just try to ignore it, it almost is like, like stop thinking about white elephants. Like now all you can think about is white elephants. Instead, just look at it and go, oh, that is a stereotype, but that doesn't really have anything to do with this person I'm in an interaction with, and then just set it aside. And then really attune yourself to the person you're in a dialogue with and let that person reveal who they are. So we're taking the individual and we're decategorizing them. So stereotypes is creating a generalization and a category to put an individual in, and we want to decategorize them. So we need to rewind the process. Oh my gosh, that sounded funny. Yeah, so rewinding the process is what we want to do there. I do have some information about writing resumes and cover letters and the interviews. And if you go all the way down, there's a document, more vocabulary, building careers and writing resumes. That's actually a document I spent quite a bit of time putting together about different types of resumes, different types of interviews. And that's just a great resource. You should download that if you have a file for looking for jobs. I don't know how you organize those type of things. This would be a good thing to put in there. So if you are applying for a job, you could use this in the future for a reference. Okay, so let's talk next about persuasion. Persuasion and rhetoric, the art of rhetoric, the art of persuasion. These are kind of interchangeable words. The word rhetoric basically means language and reasoning. And we have thousands of years in Eastern and Western cultures on the art of persuasion. And I do teach a class for those of you who are not graduating coming up, I think in the next year, called Music and Message, where we go through the history of rhetoric and look through, and we use music to analyze different rhetorical strategies. It's kind of a fun class because we get to listen to a lot of different music and look at lyrics. But for us in this class, if you're in an interview, you're selling yourself. Or if you get your job and you have a marketing job, you need to know how to persuade and how to influence others. And that's what rhetoric is about. And I'm sure we could all brainstorm a list of things you have to do constantly every day in your workplace jobs where you have to convince others through convince others to show up on time, convince others that their work is needed on this project, or that a deadline is pressing and we need to put pedal to the metal, or we need to go get a loan from a bank so we can get our business off the ground. Whatever it is, they are countless and they are numerous in reasons why and how persuasion is part of our everyday experience. I would, in fact, say it's more normal for us to talk persuasively rather than informing. So though in the field of rhetoric, we say, for general purposes, you can inform. There's three of them. You can inform, you can persuade, or you can entertain. And that is what rhetoric falls into, these three different categories: inform, persuade, and entertain. And most of us in our everyday language is living in the persuasion part of this spectrum of the way that we talk. In fact, if you just went on to your social media, if you have social media, or if you're watching your favorite TV show, start listening to every single statement that really is about trying to convince someone else of whatever that may be. I actually really like Big Bang Theory because of the way they have these constant little debates in their friend group, whether it's about their favorite superhero characters or whether it's about science. They're constantly going back and forth and really revealing their their ability to engage in reasoning and to challenge each other, which is a very debate style of rhetoric, which debate falls under persuasion. But not all persuasion is debate. But we should start to be able to tease it out. So if we're just informing, what that is I have information for you. I have information. I learned this thing, and now I will tell you about it. All right? Or I know this fact. I'm going to share this fact. Now, what informative speaking is that I let go of what I want you to do with that fact. Like, if as soon as I say, I have this fact, and that's why you should, and you have an action statement, that's why you should agree with me. That's why you should change your mind. That's why you should vote for me. That's why you should buy this product. That's why you should hire me, right? When you do, I've got this information, but then it's tagged with an action, that's persuasive. So to be informative, I just wanted you to know this. The end. Very difficult to do. Very, very difficult. Once you you start tuning in your ear to this, I'd be curious what your experience is. Maybe you'll talk a bit about that in your team meetings, but I'd be curious your perspective on how the difference between these two. Just to make sure we don't miss it, to entertain are things like toast speeches, award speeches, like presenting an award, introducing someone, accepting an award, a thank you speech. Those things are considered to entertain. Anything, and usually when there's to entertain, there's the message is driven towards unity, that we are going to bring everyone together as one. So I'm here to toast this beautiful couple in their marriage. And I, like all of us, as we search for love, as we search for our person, we can look to this couple as a driving force to fill our hearts as we're all on our journey to be accepted by others, like blah, 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 whatever it is, like there's this, that would be a speech to entertain because we're trying to, the message is driven towards coming together. Anyway, so Let's talk about what's happening in persuasive speaking. Uh, we're going to just drive straight through Aristotle's artistic proofs, and I'm going to go into some depth. And you may have, almost all of you have studied Aristotle's artistic proofs. They are repeated again and again. And here you are in another class, and they're coming up. But I do think it might be good to hear my explanation for them, because I'm just going to put a little bit of tilt on them to drive home what we're trying to do in a business and professional communication, and what does it really mean to be ethical. So I'm going to talk about logos, pathos, and ethos, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time on each of those. And then we'll see where we're at after that. It looks like at the very bottom of the page here, where I'm looking at the week 3 vocabulary, I have some things about nonverbal communication. So that's always a really good thing to always keep in mind, that communication is both verbal and nonverbal. Okay, so Aristotle's artistic proofs. Let's start with logos. Logos is words, reasoning. They are our logic, which logic sounds close to logos, though logos doesn't directly translate to mean logic. Logos is basically words. It's the language part of the message. And that means that the words that you choose, the words that you use, each vocabulary word has impact and meaning. And this is why really great orators or good persuaders are in such a place of high observation of their audience, that they're going to start tapping into very specific words that the audience will be able to decode quickly and know exactly what they mean without a lot of verbiage. That is logos. Knowing how to use a word, to use this word to mean this, right? We'll just talk about metaphors quickly to kind of illustrate this way a word or a metaphor, a group of words, can open up an incredible amount of meaning. So a metaphor in its simplest form is x equals y. X equals y is a metaphor. That means X, we know X, I'm familiar with X, but I don't know Y. What is Y? But if X equals Y, then if I know X, I also know Y. There's quite a few examples, but one of my favorite is from Romeo and Juliet, which is Juliet is the sun. So we have this simple statement, Juliet is the sun. Juliet, X. Oh, actually, in this case, Juliet is Y. I don't know Juliet. I've never met Juliet. I don't know why she's on her balcony in the middle of the night. But I do know X. I do know the sun. I have quite a bit of experience over the last week, since this is a summer intensive, with the power of the sun, right? As much as getting through an Oregon winter has its challenges and how exciting it is when the sun comes out, boy, we really get taxed when we get too much sun. So here's this beautiful statement, Juliet is the sun. And I need to know who Juliet is, so I'm going to go to what I know about the sun. Well, the sun is hot. It's bright. It's beautiful. It brings life. Without the sun, things can't grow. We can't have photosynthesis, which means we couldn't have trees and grass and plants and food to eat, and the cows wouldn't have anything to graze on. I mean, we really need the sun for the whole cycle of a sustained life. But what happens on these heat wave days when we get too much sun? And what happens if I lived in a place where all I got is sun and nothing else? Well, we know that it gets painful. You can get burned. And then sun, which was the elixir of life a second ago, becomes the poison of death and almost impossible to live with too much sun. So with right. So these are things that the magic of a metaphor. Now Juliet is the sun tells me how Romeo is craving that sun like I do in the middle of an Oregon rainy winter. And we have but then the danger of that by the end of the play, both Romeo and Juliet are dead. And so then we see the tragedy and the fatality of this little statement that happened almost tells you the whole story of the whole play. That is logos. That is very powerful language, and it's constructed very artfully and crafted very carefully. Other things that fit under logos are things like analogies, which metaphors and analogies are very similar, but an analogical reasoning, whereas where if I'm doing a comparison example, we often do that in business when we're trying to persuade, hey, this team over here had this problem, ABC, and we have problem ABC. This team did XYZ and it solved the problem. We have X, but we've never tried Y and Z. So we should do X, Y, and Z. And I think we would also solve the problem just the way that other team did. That's more of the way that we craft reasoning through analogy. We are doing a comparative back and forth of problem, problem, solution, solution. Of course, in real life, context drives everything. And anyone who's heard the statement, "Why can't you be more like your sister?" knows that most analogies have some instability to them because everything is different, and that matters. Difference matters. Okay. Oh, I also put inductive logic and deductive logic. And of course, there are lots of these. I have just a very small thing because this is not a rhetoric class or a persuasive speaking class. If you can take a class on persuasion or rhetoric, you get into a lot more. And then they even have classes on logic, deductive logic or logos pieces. And you learn how to do reasoning and arguments, and they almost look like algebraic equations. If anyone's ever seen that, you can all Google that. That's where you get those terms. It was a slippery slope or a red herring or a straw man. You learn all the nicknames for all these different reasonings and logic and what's the reasoning, logic. Okay, that last word escaped me, but you get the idea. Okay, let's move on to pathos. So pathos is the emotional baggage of your message. So you're sending this message to your listener, and what emotion do you attach? And of course, we know that language can activate emotion, right? That's what poetry is about. And not just the music, but the lyrics in the music, and not just the speech, but the volume and the rate is also part of how we convey those nonverbal channels, is how we convey emotion. So with pathos, here's where we really want to think about emotion as a range of emotions. And I'm sure we can name, like, there's happy, sad, surprise, fear, right? We have some like some basic emotions, but within that spectrum, there's a lot of nuance to it. And we never want to forget the neutral face, the neutral poker face. I mean, there's a reason why we have the term poker face in our culture, or some cultures. I mean, there's a lot of different cultures that value this idea of neutralness, which is a sign of self-regulation and stability in a person to be able to be self-regulated in their emotions. So that's why we put a lot of value on that poker face or neutrality. It's also why we consider that an emotion. That is also an emotion. Just because it's not dramatic or I'm not crying or haha, right? Just because it's not, it's over the top emotion doesn't mean there isn't emotion there. So someone who is very steady and decides to send their message with this kind of controlled, neutral feeling is still putting emphasis, and their rate and their volume of their voice also are conveying messages. In the field of persuasion, emotions are divided up in two different camps. So we have ones that are considered unethical to overuse, or to be to overuse them, or to be, I don't know what the right word is, like pushy, to push an emotion, or I'm going to do an emotion that you use pathos in a way to really insurge. And the emotions that are considered to be just on the edge are anger. So if I was like, why aren't you doing your homework? Turn in your homework right now. And I'm trying to convince you to turn in your homework, and I'm yelling at you, and I'm like, what's the matter with you? Right? Like, this is ineffective. It is unethical and it's ineffective. And we've all sometimes had, not all of us, but some of us have had to really deal with someone who was trying to motivate us through their anger. Oh, I'm going to stomp my feet and pull out my hair and throw my keys and break this clipboard, right? Whatever it is, they are using the path. They've lost the balance of the ethos, logos, pathos, and they're in too much pathos, relying on anger, just completely unethical. Fear. Fear is another one, and we get activated with fear through a lot of messaging. Social media is just surges with messages of fear as a way to motivate the viewer or the consumer of social media to stay in a place of flooded and be engaged in the website. Uh, and that means that they're using fear very unethically to engage. And they often, with that, to create a sense of danger or fear in the viewer, we're going to see a lot more misinformation. We're going to use those shortcut code words that activate someone's deepest fears. And it is part of the dark side of what is happening in our media messaging that we are often bombarded with, including even when you go shopping. You're like, has anyone been shopping where they're like, there's only one left and it's in 10 people's carts, or only a few left? Like, those are pathos driven fear, using fear to activate someone into a place of action. When we get more ethical with in the way that we're using emotion to persuade, we are engaging someone in basically a more view of hope. Hope is the highest place of emotion of that's motivating. And on the spectrum of anger and fear, hope is on the other side of that. And hope isn't the only one, but I'm trying to think of some of the other ones that fit in this. Let me just look really quick because I want to give you some other. I'm just seeing examples I just gave. That's so funny. Um, oh, okay. I'm thinking of another one. So it's interesting that I didn't see this one. I'm not finding what I'm needing, so I'm just going to keep moving forward. Sorry about that. But another one is righteous and anger, or the idea of an injustice. So when there is an idea of an injustice, that can be another pathos of motivation. And so there's different, this is a very distinctive nuance. Is my anger at you? You have done me wrong? Or is my anger at the injustice that we all face? So these are ways that that pathos gets shifted along that spectrum. There's also compassion or empathy uh, that can drive us into motivation for change or towards an action. And so those are, I don't know, I think those are good ways to think about pathos. We get so much compassion messaging with as well that there's a statement called compassion fatigue. Maybe you've heard that before. And that's when there's too much reliance on that in trying to get you to donate money or get you to uh, sign up for something, that people feel hopeless and they get a feeling of hopeless. Like hope is the highest place, but you can feel hopeless if you are over bombarded with compassion and get compassion fatigue. Uh, I think these are new things we're also dealing with because of mass media and the incredible amount of information that is coming at us. So right now in this lecture, as I'm about ready to get to ethos, the last one, uh, you really want to think about, how are you crafting messages? Are you just someone who gets input? And if you do output in a way, how are you doing that in a way to not mirror some of the toxic communication cultures that we see around us, but living a better way to dialogue with others? So ethos is the last one, and ethos is credibility, character, trustworthiness, dynamism. These are the terms that go with credibility uh, and ethos. So often people see the word ethos and they think of ethical, because it seems very similar. Ethos and ethics are very similar. And that's no accident. How are you ethical? Just as I was just saying, how do you live your life for a virtuous life? To be in a place where you are proud of how you make room in your life for consideration of others. So ethos and ethics are tied close together because the ancient Greeks in Western civilization really believed that to live an ethical life, you had to 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 be ethical. Ethos is to live an ethical life. So the words character, that's really connected to this idea of virtue. And we all are in these kind of tensions of virtue and vice. And it gets really hard when we see someone choosing unethical ways to succeed and getting away with it. And you're doing the struggle of virtue, and it feels unfair. It feels unfair that that person got away with whatever it is they got away with. And it was and you felt that it was unethical. So ethos says if you have character, you're not concerned about whether it's fair or not. You are living a virtuous life where you are living the path of righteousness. And that is part of what character embodies. Uh, Trustworthiness is about how you are consistent, reliable, and honest. And we want to kind of highlight the word honesty. And I'm not talking about the way people say use honesty as a weapon, right? Like, hey, I'm sorry you can't take the truth. I'm just being honest. Must be your problem, not mine, because I'm living a virtuous life and being honest. Right? That's a weaponized way and an unethical way to use honesty. So if this almost comes back, I don't necessarily agree completely with the statement. If you have nothing nice to say, don't say anything at all, because that has an element of dishonesty in it too. But how are you doing that cognitive complexity piece to tease out where you can find the gentle startup, where you can find the way to be empathetic and compassionate? Can you find the positive thing that is part of this? People who are coming into it with more of a fixed mindset and it's my way or the highway, and use honesty in kind of this weaponized way to excuse the work it takes to think about how a message is being received. And that is ethos. That is part of that ethos. So as soon as you create trustworthiness where people can rely on you for that reliability, for that consistency and reliability, that you acknowledge and take responsibility for your actions, and you're clear about expectations. Those are all things that create trustworthiness. And then dynamism, which sounds a little bit like dynamite. Dynamite is, the words are very similar. Dynamism is basically you being you showing up as yourself. And it's the way that you present yourself in your identity and the way you manage yourself. Like when we talked about the word professionalism, how are we showing up that acknowledges who we are, but allows room for others? And that is part of dynamism. It's the energy that you bring to the interaction, which is a necessary component to an interaction. Now, you can have just like you can have rely too much on logos, you can rely too much on pathos. When people are relying too much on ethos, they have moved into this place where it's me, I, aren't I great, great, great? Look at what's happened to me, to the place where they're it's not overconfidence, but the hubris is the amplified hubris of that person makes no room for anything else. And that's usually riding a dynamism where they are putting a lot of energy in the work of look at me, look at me, look at me. And we want to think about how do we use dynamism, and there's a quiet confidence that I don't have to amplify myself to be myself. Okay. So the other piece of credibility, so that's the ethos, pathos, logos. Good, check that off. The last little bit is the credibility piece I put in here, the initial credibility, derived credibility, and terminal credibility. And this is a cycle that goes through of how people perceive you. So if we've been other-centered, we're going to be other-centered in how they experience you. So I have, let's use me as an example. I'll ante myself up on the example. So initial credibility was the credibility I had before you even met me, right? Before you, well, and most of you haven't actually met me. Some of you have. I've seen you in my classes. But some of you have never taken a class from me. You have no idea who I am, and you signed up for this class. And what did you do? Like, there's so much uncertainty from professor to professor. Every instructor has all these different things they do. What am I signing up for? What did you do to to try and get to know who is that person? Did you go on Rate My Professor? Did you hear someone talk about my class? Did you, oh, I know someone who took this class. I'm going to call them up and ask them what they remember about me, and all that little bubbling up that you did formed my credibility before I even got on the scene. Then, so whether I start out with low credibility, oh, I don't know what's on Rate My Professor, but the comments are there, or someone didn't like my class, and they reported that to you, and so my credibility could have been low. Where maybe if you maybe my credibility was high, maybe you've heard good things about me, or someone had a positive experience in my class, or maybe it was you had a positive experience in my class, so you signed up again, or maybe you didn't and it was the only class available. I don't know. Whatever it was, when we think about where I'm coming in, high or low, that is my initial credibility. And then you see my first introduction video, you're reading my syllabus, maybe you send me an email and I answer. As soon as I'm in an interaction where I'm getting to fill in more about myself directly from me, you are going to go up and down as you are in interactions with me. So credibility has this like a wave. It's very flexible, it's very fluid. And sometimes I might say something and you're like, oh, this person isn't too bad. I'm going to raise them up on their derived credibility. Derived credibility being that what I'm doing during the speaking interactive piece. And then I said something else and it went down. And then I said something else and maybe I went up. And where do I end? Right? I start here, I come in, I go up, and then I go down, and then I come up. And where am I going to be at the terminal credibility? And the terminal credibility is when you're no longer interacting with me. You're on your own. You've had an interaction, and you think about the interaction. You go, that went like this. So wherever I leave on the scale, that becomes my terminal credibility. And whether it's high or low or in between. And then I'm in a cycle with you now where as you're about ready to come into the new interaction with me, I come back in at an initial credibility. Maybe it's exactly where I left off with the terminal, or it could be a little higher, or maybe it's even lower. And then we're back in the derived through the interaction and then terminate. So this is happening to you in a job interview. You've turned in your resume, you turn in your cover letter, and they look over all your information. Maybe you filled out an application and you get a certain level of initial credibility, and they go, we're going to call this person in for an interview. You walk through the door, the minute they see you, you don't even have to talk yet because you have your identity through your nonverbals of the way that you're dressed, the gait of your physical movements as you're coming in, and then the handshake, the classic handshake, right? And as soon as you're in this face interaction or in a Zoom room, this is why we're practicing our team meetings and being on Zoom because so many interviews are on Zoom. How do you create a frame? What is in your background? How are you presenting yourself? Can you be heard clearly? Is the internet stable for you to get through the interview? These are things that become your derived credibility. And then the interview's over, and now you're in terminal credibility as the search team or the people that are conducting the interview decide to move you along to the next interview or decide to hire you or decide not to hire you. And that's how credibility works. Okay. That is the lecture for week 3. We did it. Yay, you got through it. Thank you for hanging in there. And I'd be so curious to see your reaction and how this matches up to your experiences. Was any of this information new, or did you hear it in a new way? I'd love to get your take on it. Looking forward to it. See you next week. Bye-bye.